So we'll just wait while people join us. And we'll now begin. So welcome to the latest of our Selwyn webinars. Tonight we have about 400 people joining us from Britain and from around the world. And our guest tonight is Gill Whitty-Collins, who's going to be talking about gender equality. And it's going to be an interview and a chat in which we'd love to have your Q&A. So do start the questions coming in via the chat facility, and we'll put those to Gill as we go through the session, and we'll finish just before 7 o'clock as usual. Now, before we start, just a couple of pieces of news from Selwyn. The first one is to say tonight, obviously we welcome current students as well as alumni and friends. We have around about 200 students in residence at the moment. The majority are at home, sadly, but we have around 200 here in Selwyn. And obviously we're fervently hoping that more students will come back and that we will have everyone here for the Easter term. And we're hoping to get as much normality back as we can, subject, of course, to health restrictions and what the government recommends. So having had a Lent term that's been rather different in lots of unwelcome ways, we really want to have a Cambridge summer and then get back to full normality in the next academic year. The other thing I was going to mention was today's been an interesting day for the new library and auditorium for the Bartlam Library and the Quarry White House Auditorium, because we've seen the scaffolding coming down on the lantern at the top, and also on the clock tower. So if you look, and I always encourage people to look at the college's social media platforms. If you look at Facebook, search for Selwyn College Cambridge, or Twitter and Instagram, where it's just at Selwyn 1882, you'll see the very latest pictures today of what the library and auditorium looks like. And we very much hope that's just a prelude to coming actually to look at it later in the year when we safely can do that. So let's get underway now, and to welcome Gill Whitty-Collins, Selwyn alumna. She became a big player at Procter & Gamble, one of the major global companies, and she has written this book called Why Men Win at Work, which I read this week, and I have to say I can highly recommend. Now, as a college, we've always been trying to be at the forefront where we can of gender issues. Very interesting, if you look back at the founding of the college, the wife of the first master, Kathleen Littleton, was a pioneer of campaigning for votes for women and better social conditions for women. The first master, Arthur Littleton, also supported women's suffrage, and at least 2 early masters spoke in favour of votes for women when that was still a very controversial cause. We were one of the first colleges to admit women in Oxford and Cambridge. We had the first woman director of music across Oxbridge and the first female head porter in Oxford and Cambridge, though we also recognise we have a long way to go and still much more work to do. But the position in wider society, really what I think has driven Gill's book, is rather more concerning. Just to take a fact or two from the opening of her book, if you look at the 2020 Fortune 500, that's the 500 top firms in America, it's revealed that only 37 have women CEOs, and that's 5%. And as Gill notes in the book, there are no black female CEOs in those Fortune 500 companies. Not much better in the FTSE in the UK, the FTSE top 100 companies, only 23% of women on executive committees across those 100 companies. And I also just noticed this week, our former Ramsey Murray lecturer, Trevor Phillips, his company was behind some research showing now that there are no black executives in any of the top 3 roles at Britain's 100 biggest companies. And that's for the first time in 6 years. So when you sometimes think there is progress, actually there really hasn't been. And even for minority ethnic communities in total, only 3.4% in the top positions in those top 100 companies, compared with 14% of the population. And interestingly, 27% ethnic minorities coming in as first-year undergraduates at Cambridge. So that is at least some sign of hope for the future. But tonight we're mainly going to be talking about gender, and I'd like to welcome Gill joining us. Hello, Gill.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Great pleasure. And I really just want to ask you if you could give us a minute on your background and how coming to Selwyn. So tell us about you as an undergraduate at Selwyn.
Yeah, so I was born near Liverpool, in Warrington, and I went to mixed school, mixed comprehensive school, and was basically discovered Selwyn when I was at Widnes Sixth Form College, and found out about Selwyn, and applied to Selwyn. Absolutely fell in love with Selwyn, and was lucky to be offered. I was interviewed by the wonderful Dr. Tilby, and studied French and Spanish there. And obviously, very, very, very close to my heart. And probably the most interesting thing about me and my time at Selwyn is, and those who know me know this, I actually had my son when I was at Selwyn. So I had my son at the end of my second year. So I was doing my second year exams in a special room because I was too big a baby bump to fit into the exam tables in the exam hall, and obviously that was interesting. That was not clearly planned, and had to navigate that as well as the degree, etc. But such fond memories of Selwyn for so many reasons, not least the incredible support that I got actually through that time, from the bursar, from Dr. Tilby. I mean, I was so lucky to find myself in a place like that was just, yep, fine, okay, we'll deal with this, and this is what we'll do. So, and then obviously I, by the end of my time, I'd racked up quite a hefty nursery bill, which, as you can imagine, as a student, Cambridge day nursery fees are quite significant. So I was very clear. I had to go, no year out for me. I had to get straight out there and start my career and start paying off some debts.
So you had a pretty rapid rise at Procter & Gamble, and one of the really big global companies, as I said, and presumably a pretty tough environment, but you rose through the ranks and got to very senior positions there.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I have to say, for many years, it was smooth. It was hard work. I started as a brand assistant. I started on a brand called Wash and Go, if anyone remembers that. And I worked on, incredible brands. I worked on the launch of Pantene. I worked on Olay, Max Factor, Head and Shoulders, amazing beauty brands. And then went to Geneva after about 12 years to work on more global businesses, work on the femcare business, work on Always and Tampax. And I did. I mean, I went from brand assistant to brand manager, to marketing director, to general manager, and then ultimately to senior vice president. And for a very long time, very smooth. And one of the things, I always say is, whilst I was aware, of course, that gender equality is an issue, and I was aware of things that were impacting other women, I personally didn't encounter the barriers for a very, very long time. And, I'm ashamed to say sometimes I'm one of those women who probably didn't register it as important as it was, and didn't realize that I was actually just lucky.
And you say in a book that you actually use the phrase, "I saw the light," and you now say you are, quote, livid. That's quite a kind of transformation. So you don't really notice it, and then you're livid. Yes,
it did. I did go from a journey of one of those women to livid. I'm kind of making up for being one of those women. But yeah, it was really at the senior vice president level. So many years, a good 20 years into my career, that I started to see it. And when I say see it, I mean really witness it, and experience it, and really understand the impact of it. And the reason for that was quite simply that for the first time in my career, for the first time in my life, actually, I entered a male-dominant culture and environment. So up until that point, I had always lived and worked in a very gender-balanced environment, even up to director level. If in any room we were in that company, and in my function, which was very much the marketing and general management function, very, very gender balanced until quite a senior level. And then suddenly I was looking around in meetings and it was 80% plus men, hardly any women. And that was the first time that had happened to me. So actually at the beginning, I noticed it, but I thought, well, fine, I have absolutely no reason to think this will be a problem, because I was naive and in my mind, man, woman, what does it matter? And then I started to see the impact, and I started to see the impact that this male dominant environment was having on me, that it was having on the women around me, and that it was having on our performance and the contribution that we can make. And so that at that point, I actually became fascinated. My response was fascination. What the hell is this? What am I experiencing here? What am I seeing? I was doing, saying, being the same way I always had, that had served me really well to that point. And I could just feel it just wasn't having the same impact. And I could see the women around me, they were shrinking versus the women they were outside that male dominant culture. So I became fascinated. I started to read books and articles, and that's when I really started to understand. And I started to understand the extent of it, and to understand that this was not me. It wasn't the women I was working with. It wasn't my company. This was everywhere. It was impacting women everywhere. Every company, every organization, every country, every society. And everything I read, everything I looked at, looking at the top levels, the leadership levels in any organization, 90% plus men. And as you quoted, I think it's now actually 7% of CEOs are women, 9% of heads of state, only 25% of parliamentary positions worldwide are held by women, which is really important, obviously, because that's where really critical decisions are made that impact all of us. And if women aren't represented sufficiently, that's a problem. 25% of what we see in the news, whether it's radio, newspaper, TV, is about women and by women. So that's when I started to get livid, because I thought, how is this when women are 50% of the population, and all of the data confirms, I don't think anyone would even challenge this, that women are equally intelligent, competent, they have equal leadership ability. I mean, there's stacks of data on this. So how is this? How can this be? And it's not right, and it's not good for the world. It's not good for businesses, and it's not good for the world not to have women represented in the room, in the meeting, in the discussion, and in the decisions.
Now, one of the things we should now look at is why that's the case. And you say the book is written for men as much as, if not more, for men than for women. And I think it's important to say as well that you absolutely are not saying at any point in this book that you think women are better than men or men are better than women, but simply that there should be equality. So let's look at why that equality doesn't happen. And one of the things you say pretty boldly is men promote men.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is absolutely one. There are so many reasons, we'll talk about some of them. And so many of them are invisible, subconscious, non-intended. They're absolutely, I always say, I believe most men are good and decent and have good intentions. And I don't believe men wake up in the morning and think, how can I build the patriarchy today and destroy as many careers as possible? I don't think that's what's happening. Lots of reasons. One of them is absolutely that, we call it the mini-me syndrome, where, men will love their mini-me version coming up, looks like them, talks like them, they recognize it, agrees with them, and they will promote that. And by the way, we can talk about it separately, but women who get to senior positions don't necessarily do the same for other women. That's a whole separate conversation. But yeah, there are so many dynamics, and they're all interacting. But in many senses, the answer to why it happens is is simple. And it's as simple as the people who ultimately make the decision about who am I going to give this job to, who am I going to give this leadership position to, who am I going to vote for. They choose the men usually, not because they're men, not because they're thinking I must choose the man, but because they genuinely believe that the man is better. The man is a stronger performer. The man will do a better job. And so the real question is actually, why do they think that? Given that we know that may be true, and let's argue 50% of the time, but it can't be true 90% plus of the time. So the real question is peeling that down and understanding, okay, then why do we believe, and it's not just men, by the way, it can be women too. Why do we believe those men are better even when they're not?
One of the important points you make is that there's still a lot of inequality in looking after children or in household chores. And that can mean, for instance, that networking, that men may be much more able to network than women can. And there's a whole set of different pressures on time. How do you try to accommodate that and take account of that when you're promoting or trying to run a company?
I mean, it is absolutely one of the big issues, and it absolutely needs dealing with. I call it the umbrella theory. This concept. I always said, obviously, over my embarrassingly many years in my career, I've mentored so many women. I've coached so many women. And I have to say, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that virtually all of them have said to me at some point, verbatim, close to verbatim, this sentence, I believe my work should speak for itself. And so they are, and men, by the way, generally just know that this myth of meritocracy is just doesn't actually work in the real world. So I think of it as umbrellas. We are, as far as our bosses are concerned, we're working under umbrellas, and they can't really see the work that we're doing unless we show them. And women, because they believe generally more in the myth of meritocracy, and because they've got less time, tend to put a lot less focus on the networking and the self-marketing and on driving visibility of themselves, of their work, and getting themselves known. And I do, to your question, we cannot underestimate the time factor in this, and the fact that there is absolutely, within women in general, there is an underlying dislike of networking marketing. It is a little bit of a dirty word for women, and I think that has to change, because I think that's just not accepting the realities of how the world works. But there is a very, very real issue as well, which is that in general, and all of this is generalization, you have to generalize to talk about this, women are taking 80% of the unpaid work at home for the kids and in the family on their shoulders, even if they also have a paid job. And so obviously what that means is, that just leaves less time for this visibility driving, networking, self-marketing, even if they have the inclination to do it, because one of the areas we do have equality is the number of hours in a day that we have, right? We all have the same. So a lot of women will say, I have got my deadlines, I have to get out of the door and I have to get to this stuff. And one of the things that gives is networking and self-marketing time. So one of the big things I say to women, firstly, is you have to be aware, you have to be savvy about this, because otherwise you're going to get really frustrated, and you're going to see people whose work you don't think is as strong as yours getting the job or the promotion that you want. And the massive thing I say to companies is you need truly gender neutral parental policies. And by that, I mean, not just on paper policies, you don't just say it's for everyone. You really, really mean it. And when a man wants to take you up on those parental policies, when he wants to take you up on paternity leave, flexi work, part-time work, all of those things to take on more of his share of the responsibility at home, you have to really make that absolutely welcome and absolutely accepted. Because I can't tell you how many men have written to me over this last year. I've talked a lot about, you know, how disastrous this pandemic's been, especially for women. So many men, in fairness, have written to me to say, Jill, you know what, I would actually really like to do more, but I have absolutely zero support from my employer. My employer accepts giving some flexibility to the women, but they absolutely look down their nose on giving any flexibility to men. There is very, very deep sexism, I think, still in the subconscious of employers, that it is the women who do this stuff. And I think that's got to change.
Yeah, we should say, in fairness, of course, not all men win at work, and the caring responsibilities can be with single men, with parents, or gay couples. So it's not quite as gendered, maybe, as the stereotype would have it.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, you always generalize in these things, but yeah, there are a lot of men out there who are not in that. They're not in that group. They are doing their share, and they're even, as you say, single parenting. So they're absolutely doing it. And they need the support of so many men are writing to me saying, I want equality. And I don't just want equality because it's good for women and it's good for business. I want equality for me. I want to have the right to do this too.
The one thing that I really identified with in the book as a man is you talk at one point about the way that men sometimes wing it, and they see things as being a bit of a performance. And I certainly had the experience as a manager that sometimes you promote a man and he'd sort of imply he could do the job and go straight into it. Whereas a woman was much more likely to come and say, actually, you know what, I'm not sure you should have promoted me, and I'm not sure I was the right person for the job. And there is a real difference, I think, in the way that people approach new jobs and new challenges. And I would, you know, in all honesty, say there have been times I have felt I've been winging it a bit. And it is probably a difference of approach, isn't it, which you do identify in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, again, it's the generalization. There'll be men who relate to the argument about women on this, but it's absolutely true. You know, I talk about the competence versus confidence equation, and I think it's such an important driver of the issue. You know, we all love confident people, right? We all love confidence. It's very attractive. It makes us trust somebody. If somebody's confident in themselves and they project that confidence, we're confident in them. We want to give them work. We want to give them opportunity. And if somebody isn't, we're more reticent. And I think this is so important because, and again, generally, women are less confident than men. And this starts very early in life. It starts at school. It starts with how we treat girls at school and what we expect from girls at school, and what we teach them is important. A lot of what I call perfectionist syndrome is developed at school, which is then, when taken into life, this perfectionism and this super high expectation of, in order to be good enough, I have to be perfect, which is nonsense because it doesn't exist. Generally sits more with women than it sits with men. And so you will see this dynamic. I mean, you know, there's the famous study where it was found that men will apply for a job if they feel they have 60% of the skills and the experience, whereas women will need to be closer to 100%. You know, it all comes from these things. And it's just, I absolutely believe, for me, I think men have got this right. I think this is one thing men have got right, because I think it's more realistic to say, of course I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. I can have a go at this anyway. I think that is a far healthier and, frankly, you know, correct way to view life than to think I'm not going to put myself forward and I'm not going to feel confident doing it unless I feel like I'm absolutely perfect. Because I think women will wait a very long time to do something. They'll wait forever if they're waiting to feel like they're absolutely perfect and absolutely ready.
Jill, we've got loads of questions coming in, so I want to go to those in 5 or 6 minutes to make sure we have half an hour to talk about those. I'm interested to know that when we're talking about difference, What about the male, and they are largely male entrepreneurs who really have changed the world? And I'm thinking now of Jobs and Bezos and Musk and Zuckerberg. And you say in the book that men are probably more, quote, risk-taking. And in a normal job, you say actually men risk-taking is fine. Women are sometimes more analytical or look at a wider range of inputs. Are there some breakthrough moments where actually you need to be, I mean, I wouldn't like any of those particular people to come for dinner particularly, but are they different in some way?
I mean, there's evidence that men are generally more comfortable with risk taking than women, and that there's actually there's lots of biology based theories about adrenaline and testosterone and all of those things. But I think what's actually really interesting about this is that risk-taking can seem quite attractive, quite sexy, and we think, oh, he's a risk taker and he did that. But actually, a risk taker is not necessarily, or a testosterone-fueled risk is not necessarily a good decision. And there's been lots of research in, hedge funds, for example, which shows that, women's funds actually perform extremely well, if not better. And one of the theories is that there are actually less emotional risks taken, and there is more analysis. So I think there's just this danger of us, coming to the conclusion women don't like taking risks, which may generally be more true, and thinking that's a bad thing. It is not necessarily a bad thing not to take risks. And I don't know, with those individuals, I don't know how much of their success is due to their testosterone fueled risks, or how much of it is just due to absolute strategic brilliance on their part. But I do think risk taking is an area to be careful of for women and for men.
We really have an enormous number of questions, so I'm going to get on to 3 really quick points. First, in the book, I was quite interested, you don't seem very keen on diversity training.
I'm not against diversity training. I think my point is just it's not enough. You see a lot of companies who tick the box with diversity training. They'll do the good old unconscious bias training, and everyone will leave thinking, oh, isn't that interesting how biased I am? And then absolutely it will make no difference. And then, diversity training, if it's done in the wrong way and it's not done sustainably, there is a lot of evidence that it can actually do more harm than good, because what it can do is actually bury the issue under the surface. Because if you don't really tackle the underlying issues and the underlying whys of, the cultural reasons why this happens, and the male dominant culture, the confidence curtain issue, the umbrella theory, all of those things, if you just run a training and people don't really get it, they don't really get that this is a massive opportunity for business, that their business will be stronger if they fix it, they don't really understand why it happens, and they don't understand what to do about it. What can happen is they can basically smile along and say, okay, I know my bosses they want me to be on this, so I will say that I'm on this. And I can't say out loud what I really think. So what we do is we can just push the issue under the carpet sometimes. And, I've certainly experienced what I'd call very polite cultures, where you would absolutely, unless you were looking very, very carefully, you would see no signs of overt sexism or lack of support for equality and diversity, but it is absolutely there under the surface. So that's what I mean when it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just it needs to be part of a whole holistic plan, which is supported by the organisation and by the really top people at the organisation, because they really believe that it's going to help their business and that they're going to be committed to it, forever, not just for the period of a training intervention.
You also don't really buy the argument that, although you very clearly articulate the damage the pandemic has caused to women in general, you don't really buy the argument that women leaders have been better through the pandemic. People say, contrast Jacinda Ardern and Angela Merkel with, Trump and Johnson. You don't really go for that in gender terms.
No, I think it's been a really interesting debate, that one, hasn't it? People are always writing to me about that one. I clearly, we've seen some really interesting examples in the last year, and we've seen some phenomenal female leadership and we've seen some terrible male leadership. But I do not fundamentally buy the argument that women are better leaders than men. And I deeply believe that both men and women are capable of all leadership skills and approaches, you know, which includes really good listening and really strong empathy, and fantastic collaboration with a diverse team before making your decisions and paying the price later. I believe men can do that and women can do that. I think what we've seen more is the consequence of the leaders that we've chosen. I think some countries have chosen leaders, frankly, on the basis of their confidence, more than necessarily their competence. And I think some have chosen very competent leaders. And I don't think that really has anything to do with what gender they are. I think it's really just more about the type of leaders we choose. But this is the seduction of confidence, you see. This is why we've got to be so careful to look behind this confident curtain and say, you know, behind this, you know, bravado, is there real substance here? And is there somebody who's going to really lead our company or lead our country? And I hope we all choose our leaders more carefully in the future. Let's just say that.
Okay, there are so many questions that we'll go through these really quite rapidly, so that I can give you them fairly quick fire. But Abigail Matten-Howarth, who's a fairly recent alumnus, says the Netherlands have just introduced a hard gender quota on board level appointments. Do you think legislative changes of that sort is the way forward? So
I have come to believe yes. And it took me a long time to get here. I would not have said this 10 years ago. I don't know specifically what target the Netherlands have put in. I'll come back to that because I get frustrated with some of these targets. But I think in principle, you know, if I ruled the world, which isn't that a terrifying thought, I would absolutely mandate, and I would make it, you know, absolutely law, that companies at board level and exec level were 50-50. And I've come to believe that because, very simply, I don't believe we will ever get there without it. And the reason is because of all these dynamics, the culture, all the subconscious stuff. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't make a manual intervention, this is just going to continue to be a self-fulfilling prophecy forever. So I've come to believe, actually, you know what, make the intervention and say we need to get there, and we need to get there fast. And for me, it's very simple. Equality is 50-50. You know, I'm not a mathematician, but I think that's pretty much where we are. And I get very frustrated when I see target setting that is, you know, recently I think Germany, their mandating of one woman on every board, and this was celebrated as if it was fantastic. I actually find that extremely patronizing to women, and actually quite sexist underneath it, is because it's got such a low expectation of women, hasn't it? If you believe that women are 50% of the world in equal intelligence, why the hell would you say you want one woman on the board? And that's not even mentioning the fact, by the way, that if you are that one woman on the board, you're in an extremely difficult position because you're in a male dominant culture. It's going to be extremely difficult for you to perform and contribute there, potentially even impossible. So yeah, I have come to believe actually that we need to force it. I have.
Okay, rather the opposite end of trying to fix it, from Anna Philpott, who is an alumna, and she's also a head of school in Cambridge now. And she says, I've been on leadership training where the emphasis has been on women fixing themselves. Can women really make lasting change to this societal dynamic by fixing themselves? And if not, how do we fix the patriarchy? And she says, by the way, there's one female head of school out of 6 and one female pro vice chancellor out of 5 at Cambridge, and the male VC.
That's great data. We're going to put that in the next book. I think it's a fantastic question, and talk about this a lot. I am absolutely the last person who is going to say to you, women, you need to fix yourselves. You need to do this. You need to stop doing that. You need to talk like that. You need to dress like that. That irritates me, and I don't like that at all. And I fundamentally believe that this issue is so deep and so strong that it has to be tackled by all genders. It absolutely, and importantly, it has to be embraced and tackled by men, because men have 90% plus of the leadership of the world. So frankly, whatever women do, until men start getting that this is something we really should do and everyone's going to benefit from it, women are not going to get anywhere. Having said that, I would give the caveat. I do think there are some things, I think everyone's got a role to play, and I absolutely think women have got some things that they can do. And for me, it's not about how they dress or how they speak, but it is, just being, very aware from a young age of these issues, understanding what will happen, not being blindsided by them, being prepared, being ready. And that includes, by the way, understanding things like the umbrella theory. Understand that's just the way the world works. I don't think we'll ever live in a world where, this human dynamic of people promoting and giving jobs to people who they see and know. I don't think that dynamic will ever change. So I do think there are some things that women just be savvy about the way the world works, the way people work. There are some things we could do to help ourselves. But fundamentally, honestly, most of the work here needs to be done by men, and it needs to be done by men on the male dominant culture that when they look around, they find themselves in.
A counterblast from Yorkshire, Jim Dickinson says, my experience is that women recruit women. This seems to be at odds with Gill's position, or is this only a problem that kicks in at a very senior level?
I have not seen the data that women recruit women, but I wouldn't argue with it. It absolutely could be true. For me, where I've seen the problem is definitely, to your question, at the more senior levels. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there is some fantastic sisterhood out there. We've all come across women. I certainly have come across women who've really looked out for me and really supported me. And I know many women have, but I think we have all, at a senior level, experienced the senior woman who doesn't hold the ladder down for other women, or shakes it so violently that she doesn't have a chance of holding on to it. Lots of reasons why that happens, but it absolutely does happen. And that is a problem, because, if you think about it, if men have most of the leadership positions, and it's extremely difficult for women to get any, when a woman makes it, and there are some women who do, right? I call them the super 7% women, they do make it. When they make it, if they then don't support younger women, and meanwhile the men are generally supporting their mini-me's, you're stuck again. So I absolutely do see it, unfortunately, too much at the senior level. I know a lot of women are talking about this, and a lot of women are really pushing on it, and really, calling out to those women. You get a lot of feminist phobia at the top, women who will disassociate themselves from this because they've frankly been taught through the years that it doesn't look good for them, and they would be better to be one of the lads. So,
okay, really interesting question from one of the things in the book is mentioned talk over women. Sorry, I just did. But Caroline Allen, a question about self-marketing. My experience has been that my self-marketing has been seen much more negatively than when men do the same. In fact, I would say it's damaged my career by being seen as too pushy.
Interesting. Now, obviously, I would need to, understand the specifics a little bit, and, understand exactly what happened here. But it's absolutely one of the things that puts women off is they often feel uncomfortable doing it, and then when they do it, they think, oh, I'm not sure that went very well for me. And there are, you know, beyond self-marketing, there are underlying dynamics here of how we perceive women versus how we perceive men doing exactly the same thing. Lots of women giving examples of having spoken in a meeting in a completely non-offensive way, but being called aggressive or bossy or pushy or all of those things. And that all has to do with, you know, what we're programmed with from a really early age in film and in the media on what women look like and do and what men look like and do. We're not used to some behaviors, but we've got to get used to it. What I would say about self-marketing, again, without knowing this specific case, is it's like anything. You have to be you. You have to do it your way. And I think sometimes what can go wrong for women is when they think, okay, I better do this, and they sort of copy or do it the way they think others do it. And it's going to be inauthentic if you do it that way. I think you've got to find your own authentic way to do it. Authenticity is so important in the workplace. People can smell inauthenticity. They can smell when you're acting. They can smell when you're trying to be someone you're not. My biggest advice is be you, do you. Yes, market yourself, but do it in a way you're comfortable with. One of the pieces of advice that, you know, I was given at quite a young age, and by the way, I'm going to give you the caveat, I was terrible at self-marketing. So I wish I'd read my book 20 years ago. But one of the pieces of advice was talk about the work rather than yourself. So don't view it as I'm going to sell myself. View it as I'm going to sell the work. And that can feel much more comfortable and maybe much more authentic for you.
Gill, I'm going to read 3 questions together now,
hey,
and obviously just pick out the themes you want to particularly pick out. But Sue Clark, who's Selwyn 83, says, I'm one of a tiny number of female professors of surgery, and we have exactly the same issues with women in surgery, and in particular in senior leadership roles. How do you think we should support upcoming women to overcome this? Caroline Elliott says, one reason why women are more likely to be perfectionists or avoid risk is that society tends to be much harsher on women who make real or perceived mistakes, and women have to work harder to avoid messing up in situations where if it was a man, it would just be laughed off. Do you agree? And then a question from Heather Mackay. As a woman, about 5 years into my career, I've had consistent harassment from men across a range of styles: sexualization, sexual harassment, belittling, and micromanagement. It's hard to maintain confidence in your own ability when facing these barriers. What would you say about women, and what do they need to do about these issues beyond just acting confident?
So many important questions in there. I'm not sure I'm going to do them all justice, but I'll start with the first thing, because I was fascinated this week. I saw that the tweet. I don't know if you guys also saw it, where there was the professor, the female professor and the male professor on a TV program, and he'd been given the professor title and she'd just been given her name. And then when she raised it, she was then basically told to shush. Sort of, it's not important, it's only a title. And, you know, it doesn't matter. There's, you know, what you said was important. It's a classic case. So yeah, I think it's so important. And for me, you know, obviously what I know is, I know the business world. That's all I know. I don't know the academic world. I don't know the world of surgery. But what I can pretty confidently say is that we will share so many of the same issues, and we'll share so many of the same drivers. So, you know, all I would say, you know, to somebody who has made it, you know, super 7% woman in that context, is you have such a massive role to play for the younger women. And, you know, it sounds like you're absolutely willing to do that, but role modeling for them, mentoring them, but also sponsoring them. You know, sponsoring goes beyond mentoring. They say, you know, they say mentors talk with people and sponsors talk about them. You know, what can you do? What contribution can you do to make sure that those younger women who are potentially, you know, not as obvious, potentially their competence is not as obvious behind the confidence of others. What can you do to really, you know, help them and lift them up? So it's really so important that we do that. And by the way, obviously that's not just women who can do that for other women. There are a huge number of men out there who are doing this for women as well. They're absolutely, you know, feminists, as I call them, who believe in women, they believe in equality, and they're working very, very hard.
Can I just ask you a quick fire one, which came actually from Janice Selwyn, the Vice Master, building on that, who says, would you advocate a 50-50 rule in all professions, including, for instance, university professors and medical consultants?
In principle, yes, I would, unless there was a really clear reason that I'm not thinking about, that it wouldn't be relevant. Yeah, I absolutely would, because I'm not aware of any inherent difference in abilities. I'm not aware of any reason why a woman couldn't be a professor of this as much as a man could be. So yes, I would. I mean, I've had my epiphany, and I am absolutely committed to this. And you know, when I see the 30% target and people celebrating that, I get really livid. Why 30? Why on earth 30? So I talk about a little bit about the perfectionist point.
So say again.
There was the question about perfectionist and standards.
Yeah.
I think that is a really interesting question, and again, I don't have data to say that women are judged to a higher standard, and therefore it's understandable they need to be more perfectionist. And I do personally believe that a lot of the need to be perfect is coming from the woman rather than from the outside. I absolutely believe that in most instances there are our own standards, not necessarily the standards of others. But having said that, you know, I do see that, and maybe it's because we just have, you know, fewer women in these very highly visible top leadership positions, and therefore their mistakes are more obvious and visible, and maybe we do leap on them more. But I must say, you know, one of the things that I've said really strongly over the last few weeks, and I think it's so important, I know it's resonated with a lot of people, and I feel very strongly about it, is, you know, we've just seen the first ever US vice president who is a woman, and obviously that is only one role, but it's clearly very, very significant from a role modeling point of view and what it shows young girls they can be. But one of the pleas that I've made is, please let's not expect her to be perfect, Kamala. You know, we don't expect our male leaders to be perfect. We forgive them for many, many, many mistakes, and we must do the same with our women. So I do think that's super important.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to cram in as many questions as we can, so we'll keep it bouncing along. Helen Nixieman actually says to us, it's interesting, all the questions for Gill seem to be from women. It would be good to hear the views of some men. So I'll cite a couple of men. So Peter Basile says, wonderful talk. I'm 100% supportive of everything that might promote diversity. He does ask her the question, when someone asks for hard evidence that a diverse board is a better board, are there studies to prove this? So I'll give you a chance to answer that in just a second. I also want another man, John Grant. Is there actually too much concentration on gender because it's visible, whether other traits of diversity are needed but are neglected? For instance, there are loads of women MPs, but precious few MPs who are scientists or engineers. But maybe we could just answer the question about, are there studies showing a more diverse board is a better board?
There are so many studies. There are so many, and there are just the years and years and years and stacks of data showing that companies with equality and diversity at the senior level, at the board level, at the exec level, deliver stronger results. They deliver stronger top line results. They deliver stronger bottom line results. And I would say, if you haven't already, read the book. But if this is the question you're most interested in, go straight to the Maybe Men Are Just Better chapter, And there's lots and lots of data in there about how you'll be, after the end of that chapter, you'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. And it's important, because I do think this isn't something that I can just sit here and say, and feminists can just sit here and say. It's really important that there is data behind it, and there absolutely is. And I do think, you know, the question about broader diversity, of course, I mean, I'm obsessed with this. And I'm obsessed with this not because I think it's the only important thing. I don't even think it's the most important thing. You know, is women being 50% of CEOs the most important thing in the world? No. There are women still being forced into marriage, abused, mutilated. You know, that there are much bigger issues than this. I focus on this because this is what I understand. Because I think I understand this in a way that in a unique way, because of my experience. And so I believe that I can help with this. And there are many other important equality and diversity things that need to happen, that, you know, they are just as important. And I personally believe, and I know Roger, you and I have taught this, I believe that if we can create a world where women can be as comfortable and as relaxed and perform and contribute and have equal opportunity as men, I believe that world, that culture, will also be a significantly easier one for everybody to perform in. It won't answer everything, but I do believe it will go a long way. But yeah, I absolutely focus on this, and I make no apology for that. I know there are others who are doing brilliant work elsewhere.
Okay, Peter says, wonderful answer, thank you. An interesting question from Claire Schnellman. You support a 50% balance target. To what extent would you also support that in currently female-dominated professions, e.g. primary education, childcare, midwifery?
100%. I would totally support it. And I do. I mean, I laugh and say, sometimes people write to me and say, hey, we're doing really well. We got 90% women. And I say, okay, you got a dominant culture the other way. I mean, you know, if we really, really believe in this, we really need to believe in balance. We need to believe that everybody needs to be represented everywhere. And that's obviously not just gender. So yeah, absolutely. I would be as wary of a dominant culture, of a female dominant culture, as I would be of a male dominant culture, because they will be missing things. If you have a dominant culture, you miss the diversity of input and ideas and solutions, and therefore you don't make complete and good decisions. So totally with you.
There are so many questions. I would like to apologise to people I'm not going to get around to. Probably time for two more. Marissa Dutherborough says to both of us, fabulous chat. I know women tend to face harsher criticism based on their appearance. What's your view on this? And there is actually a bit in the book, isn't there, where you talk about dressing and so on. So have a go at that.
Oh, this, I mean, I could talk for days about this. Such an interesting one, because I personally find it really, really hard to tell people what to wear, because I just think it's part of our uniqueness. I'm saying to women, on one hand, be yourself and bring that, because that's how you'll succeed. And then on another hand, but don't wear that doesn't sit well with me at all. And I subscribe to the view that boring clothes are a boring mind. So I find it very hard. However, I will share that the Super 7% women that I interviewed for the Women Who Win at Work chapter, all of them without exception talked about just an acceptance that there is a work uniform. And I thought that was an interesting way to think about it, because what they said was, actually, this isn't a gender thing. There's a work uniform for men too. And there's a work uniform, and, you know, just embrace the work. You do it your own way, but embrace the work uniform. And then, and this is where it all gets a bit controversial, you know, one of the women I interviewed, who's, you know, CEO of a very big company, said, just the awareness. I don't like it, but just the awareness that do you want men to be looking at your body, or do you want men to be thinking about your mind? Because unfortunately they may not be able to do both at the same time. That's a whole controversial area that we could go on to. Roger, I did want to come back to the harassment question, because I think it was important, and I feel I don't want to miss that, because
absolutely.
One of the things that I say is I'm very focused on, if in the gender pyramid, I'm focused on the top of the pyramid. I'm focused on what I call luxury gender issues. These are relatively luxury gender issues, talking about, why didn't I get to be CEO, or why are women not prime ministers? Important, but luxury compared to the things that happen at the bottom. And frankly, if women are being harassed, and even physically abused, and even worse, that has to be the number one priority. So hearing somebody saying that they've experienced this bottom of the pyramid stuff is always horrendous. And I'm really happy to follow up afterwards, by the way, with the person who asked that. But my first piece of advice would be you not necessarily to believe that if it's in the workplace that HR will solve this for you, because sometimes that doesn't work. And one of the pieces of advice I had from, again, the Super 7% women was, they all told me that they had experienced harassment at work, and that not a single one of them had gone to HR and tackled it directly. They'd actually used roundabout ways of getting support. And I know many women who have literally lost their jobs because they have raised this, and the senior, very expensive man has been prioritized. So I hate this, but it needs managing to protect yourself. So really happy to follow up on that if I can be of any help in that area as well.
Well, Heather, who asked the question, has just messaged to say thanks for coming back to that, and she knows it would have been an experience across the board, so we can certainly put people in touch. And there's also an interesting functional question from Luca Newbold, who says, is it possible to listen to a recording of this? I'd like my daughter to listen to it. And the answer is yes, it will be on the Selwyn website. And if you just contact us, we'll make sure you can find the link. I just want to ask one final question from Helen Scott, the commercial lead for Alliance UK and Europe and the Middle East, on a group called Women in Meat, supplying meat to retailers, which she says is a very dominated male industry. A simple question: what would you say to your younger self now?
Well, as I said, I wish my younger self could read the book. I really do, because I know and understand things now that I just didn't then, and I wasn't prepared for them. I was blindsided because, I think it's a wonderful thing to be brought up in a way that you believe you're equal to any man, and that you're up to doing anything you want. That is a wonderful thing, but the workplace is not necessarily set up to deliver. So I think the biggest thing I would say to myself is get yourself informed about this issue, and don't be arrogant, Jill. Just because you don't feel like gender inequality's got in your way at school or at university or whatever, don't be arrogant. There are women out there who are clearly telling you that it gets in the way. So find out about it, talk to them, find out about the issues, find out what happens, find out why it happens, and get yourself ready for it. And I think that I would have done some things better if I had, but I think more importantly, I would have started talking about this sooner, and I would have started hopefully contributing to the fix and the progress sooner, which is at the end of the day much more important than my own personal experience, which I've been lucky has been relatively still a very positive one.
Jill, it's a very good point to end, and I would just like to thank you on behalf of everyone who's been, I'm sure, enthralled tonight by the conversation, and we're just enormously grateful, and thank you for being another illustrious member of the Selwyn community, and we're very proud of all our alumni. I will do my usual plug for events coming up. So actually, there is a Procter & Gamble connection, and with our next guest, who's Tim Davey, who also worked for Procter & Gamble. He's now Director General of the BBC. He and Gill know each other, and I think you overlapped slightly at Selwyn.
I was at P&G because he told me all about it. So
it's just that networking, you see, it gets everywhere. So that's next Thursday the 18th of February, again at 6 o'clock. And then on Thursday, the 25th of February, we have Nigel Newton and a surprise guest as well, I think, who will be talking about publishing and the Bloomsbury Empire, which was based partly on the discovery of Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling. So lots to come up, and we would thank you hugely. There are, as ever, lots of appreciative comments coming in. I'll just read a few of them. Alva Hoburn, thanks so much. It was brilliant. Marianne Jana, thank you, fascinating and important. Looking forward to reading the book. Sarah Stamford, thanks, fascinating and thought-provoking. Claire Roche, really great talk. Would appreciate a link to be able to share with my family. Kath Elliston, thank you so much, Jill. Ulrika Michael, great. Dorothea Moser, thank you, that was empowering. And they're all whizzing in at a rate of knots. So much appreciation from people here.
I'm saying a thank you from a feminist as well. I love that. This is we need you guys. Thank you so much, Roger, for inviting me. You know, I'm so proud to be able to do it. So happy to be able to do it. And thank you for the brilliant questions. Really brilliant questions from you, and also from the audience. You made me think about a few things, which is fantastic.
Okay, that's brilliant. Just tell us, Jill, the website that you can get in touch with you via your website, or you're on Twitter as well.
Yes, so you can, I have my website, gillwhittycollins.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Gill Whitty-Collins. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and yes, just ping me if you want to connect. It would be fantastic to be in touch.
I think you'll get quite a response to that. So thank you for the invitation.
Wonderful.
And
more
thanks to everybody
friends. I love that.
Thanks to everybody for being with us tonight. We'll see you next Thursday for Tim Davey. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.